Hello once again, one and all, as we look back to the olden days of the FPS, Medal of Honor on the good old PSX. For such a forgotten series after EA decided to bet all of their shooter work on Battlefield, it's no longer known all that well that Medal of Honor started life quite a few years before both that series and Call of Duty. I think COD came out around 2003 in the Xbox days, and yet we had this pixelated marvel to unseat Perfect Dark around the 5th gen. This was back in the days when EA was still smart enough that they had to give half a damn when they made their games, and they didn't tie all of their ground level employees to 500-ton millstones, so they surprisingly put their all into the original game that came out for its series. Like other World War II shooters that were competing with it at the time and would come into the fold later when this turned into a legit genre, the story of Medal of Honor is pretty typical stuff for the genre. You're slapped into the role of American military man on the road to complete random anti-Nazi objectives behind enemy lines to single-handedly disrupt their war effort. In this game, you get the whole kit and caboodle: destroy submarines, trains, and their fuel depots, destroy generators and fuel plants, sabotage a hydroelectric dam, their nuclear operations, and even the grand finale mission, a rocket bomb. The escalation in what Jimmy is required to do is pretty satisfying, since you start off nicking ID badges and capping a couple Nazi officials, and then you move on to completely derailing their whole nuclear program. You think if I say Nazi a third time, YouTube will demonetize this on the spot? For as humdrum as the game looks in retrospect, EA did really throw their weight behind this project, since this was still during the period when the future Hitler of video games was still working with the military enthusiast Steven Spielberg, who takes credit for writing the game's story. Furthermore, in comparison to future competitors, who mostly went with shoot all the dudes and hit a contextual button every half hour or so to complete the mission, EA was actually fiddling around with a couple different gameplay ideas other than shoot the dudes. For as pixelated and linear as the levels get, there are actually some hidden collectibles you can grab in some more detailed facility levels if you choose to look around, and several of this game's levels have you going around in a stealth system that feels like a stripped-down adventure game, where you have to use smuggled IDs in order to fool the enemy guards and get the consoles that you can screw up and gather intel. This becomes apparent in the U-boat mission, where you have to hit a bunch of engines with a wrench in order to destroy the entire ship, and it's pretty interesting since they fleshed out the entire system with animations and voice clips to really sell the hiding in plain sight saboteur that you end up being. Unfortunately, on the other hand, it's also let down a bunch of times by the 5th gen's brain-dead stealth AI, but I suppose not every game can be Metal Gear Solid. It's still remarkable that EA at the turn of the millennium had so much creativity to not simply default every mission to shoot the dudes with our half-measure reticle system. But I suppose you can't always have everything in EA, play the way you want, or whatever the fuck their original tagline was. I'm not sure if this game was in the before times of the pre-DualShock, but you really wouldn't know it from how the game plays by itself. Yeah, for anyone who's confused about that, when the original PlayStation came out, the DualShock that we know today wasn't released with the original release. The first PlayStation controller only had a D-pad instead of a joystick, which is why if you ever play Crash Bandicoot, it ends up feeling so weird when you're playing because it was released before thumbsticks. The workaround that EA came up with for Medal of Honor is to slow the shooting action down in order to allow the player to drag a reticle across the screen in order to aim at enemy skulls, which more or less works fairly well. I mean, it was literally copied from Goldeneye 007, and it works well enough for just regular shooting encounters. It looks like EA was able to strike a meaningful balance between slowing the gameplay down so it's possible to win while wrestling the controls and not making the game as easy to win as pulling your pants down and mooning the Nazis to death. Of course, this all goes completely out the window when you fuck up the stealth, since you're not beating an M5 with your goddamn service pistol. Since Medal of Honor has you taking on so many of the Reich's military facilities, you get to experience a wide range of shooting areas and levels, different sorts of enemies, and a couple gimmicky sections to spice things up. Sometimes you'll just be gunning down the odd patrols in the streets of occupied France, and later on you'll be shooting up the entire staff at the heavy water storage place. It's almost every mission that's in the entire World War II shooter genre in one game, and as fantastical as the scenarios are, they certainly feel respectable to history and more or less truthful to the scientific advancements of the Nazi regime. But on the other hand, this game is taking place around 1944, so you don't get to see the beginnings of Germany falling apart in the game, but I suppose they had to keep something for future games they were going to work on. It is kind of a lame workaround that the game supports its narrative shortcomings by stuffing the cutscenes full of stock war footage over a gruff militario monologue about how great you are and how much challenging bullshit is being thrown on your shoulders alone. But, I suppose considering how the rest of the game works, maybe we should be grateful for small mercies, that they didn't try to do 1999 3D in-engine storytelling. But for as janky as the game looks on screen after experiencing the origin of the World War II shooter, I would readily recommend grabbing a copy on GOG or Origin if it's there, or somewhere less legit for the enthusiasts, because it's a quality throwback to what FPSs used to be when they weren't being ruined by having to support the biggest entertainment series in the universe, or being ravaged in general by big business. EA at one point wanted to make a historical shooter, and they threw all the typical ideas of the World War II game and some creative gameplay ideas to make a remarkable, content-full game for the original PlayStation. The game manages to feel realistic and a uniquely legitimate look at the entire Nazi war machine. Every plan they hatched and all the ridiculous super weapon schemes that would have scared the West had not Platoon Pants bombed the living shit out of the entire country. Yes, the combat is janky as balls, it being 3 generations old at this point, and was the baby steps for first-person 3D gunplay once consoles could do that sort of thing. But the game works as well enough as it needs to be. It's fluid, I guess. It's really understandable, and considering they had to slow everything down, it's extremely accessible as well. If you're looking for a faithful throwback to what World War II shooters used to be before big business destroyed the genre and stitched up its course for resale, then take a spin on the old pixely streets of France and have a nice weekend for a change, rather than hoping that Season 7 of whatever the shooter of the day is hasn't managed to destroy the entire experience for you. At least out here in 1995 EA land, it's always timeless gameplay.